may I take it that the provisional rules of procedure and the annexed technical guidelines for the use of audiovisual presentations are adopted? It is so decided. The Preparatory Committee also made certain recommendations concerning the implementation of two of the rules. They are indicated in footnotes 1 and 3 of the rules. I take it that it is the wish of the conference to adopt these recommendations. It is so decided. Before turning to the next item, I would like to give the floor to the chairman of the Preparatory Committee, Father George F. Mahoho of Kenya. Father Mahoho.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the opening this morning of the Habitat Conference was the beginning of a chapter for the new era in the history of mankind. Simply put, mankind is at crossroads. The man-made environment is in a state of crisis, the dimensions and scale of which has never been experienced before. The decisions we are going to make, all unmake, in the course of these next 12 days cannot but be amongst the most momentous in the history of mankind. To some of us, however, Mr. President, the opening of this conference marks the signing off of the prologue to that new era. That is why, Mr. President, I am very grateful for this opportunity to address the conference at this early stage of its work, to introduce briefly the work of the Preparatory Committee, which I had the honor to chair during the course of its 3 sessions, and which was instrumental in the elaboration of the provisional agenda for the conference, which is now before you for your approval. It would be too time-consuming, Mr. President, to retrace in detail the evolution in the thinking of the Preparatory Committee with regard to the conceptual framework, structure, and substantive contents of the conference. The agenda and documentation before you constitute the results of this evolution. However, what I would like to assure you, Mr. President, and this conference is that we are participating in one of the conferences that has had the most elaborate and thorough preparations involving continuous interaction among my committee, the conference secretariat, and the several regional conferences held over a period of 2 years, as well as a continuous process of consultations with governments and international organizations active in this area. In the course of our preparations for this conference, the committee realized that getting a coherent grip on the issue of human settlement was an exceedingly difficult task, since human habitat includes everything. What aspects could one leave out when dealing with a complete cycle of mankind? And yet, Mr. President, we did recognize the fact that to try and grasp everything is to risk grasping nothing. It therefore became evident to the committee, after some soul-searching encounters, that we recommend that this conference should take three basic forms, namely, 1, the adoption of a declaration of principles. We envisage this as being a set of internationally agreed principles and a fundamental statement of political will to which the international community would commit itself. 2, the formulation of recommendations for national action. From the very beginning, we recognized that because of the nature of human settlements issue, recommendations for national action should be the central outcome of this conference. 3, the elaboration of a program for international cooperation. Over and above these considerations, Mr. President, the committee was guided in its deliberations throughout this preparatory process by the conviction that our submissions to the conference should enable it to effectively promote and support human settlements as a strategic instrument for development. Thus, as we proceeded in our deliberations, the committee's aim was to ensure that the recommendations which would emerge from the conference would be as specific and solution-oriented as possible and would contain explicit action plans at the regional, national, and local levels. At the same time, Mr. President, the committee felt that the substantial differences which exist in the world in geography, cultural background, economic and social conditions should be fully taken into account. We also constantly bore in mind the multidisciplinary and cross-sectoral nature of human settlement problems, which require that their solutions be mutually supporting and integrated in both the economic and social spheres. As regards international cooperation, Mr. President, there was an understanding in the committee that the major purpose of programs in this area should be to strengthen national efforts through the strengthening of national, regional, and sub-regional institutions. A reasonable measure of agreement was also arrived at on both the structure of the policy document on international cooperation and on the broad criteria that institutional arrangements in this area should meet. Considerable attention was also given by the committee throughout its 3 sessions to the audiovisual aspects of the conference. The committee was conscious that new grounds were being broken in this respect, and special emphasis was therefore placed not only on the in-session aspects of the program, but also on the need to ensure continued availability and use after the conference of the materials for audiovisual presentation. And now, Mr. President, I hand over to you the stewardship of the results of the preparatory process for a conference which is the culminating point of the Stockholm Environment Conference, the Bucharest Population Conference, the Rome Food Conference, the Mexico Status of Women Conference, and the just ended Nairobi UNCTAD 4. For indeed, it is in human habitat that the effects of all these particular issues come together. In joining hands to look for solutions, Mr. President and distinguished delegates, let us never lose sight of the responsibilities placed on us in this conference for the possible continuance of life on Earth. the success of this conference will require the individual and cooperative effort of all. That is what in my country we call the Harambee spirit. United, singly and jointly, we work together. Let Habitat Vancouver become known to history as the conference and the city that give new hope to the future of mankind. Thank you, Mr. President and distinguished delegates.
I wish to thank Father Mohoho for his fine statement. The conference is indeed grateful to him and to members of the Preparatory Committee and to those who participated in the pre-conference consultations for their efforts to expedite our work and to get this conference off to a good start. I propose the conference take note of the recommendations of the Preparatory Committee at its first and second sessions and is contained in document A-Conf 70/7 and be guided by them as we consider each point on our agenda. It is so decided. The next item relates to the establishment of committees and organization of work. The Preparatory Committee has recommended the establishment under Rule 42 of the Rules of Procedure of 3 committees of the whole, namely Committee 1, Committee 2, and Committee 3. I take it that the conference agrees to this recommendation. It is so decided. I now invite the conference to take a decision on the election of the 33 vice presidents and the rapporteur general of the conference, and the chairman for each of the 3 main committees. I understand that agreement has been reached on the candidates for these offices. It has been recommended that Rule 40 of the Rules of Procedure should be waived in order to save time and that we proceed to the election by acclamation. Therefore, in the case of the vice presidents, if the number of candidates for a particular group corresponds to the number of seats allotted to that group, I shall declare those candidates elected. I take it that the conference agrees to proceed to the election on that basis. Then it is so decided. I have been informed of the following candidatures. For Vice President, 8 from Africa: Congo, Gabon, Libyan Arab Republic, Mauritania, Nigeria, Uganda, United Republic of Cameroon, and Zambia. 8 from Asia: India, Iraq, Japan, Pakistan, Philippines, Sri Lanka, Syrian Arab Republic, and Thailand. 5 from Eastern Europe: Czechoslovakia, German Democratic Republic, Hungary, Romania, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. 6 from Latin America: Bolivia, Cuba, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Mexico, and Trinidad and Tobago. And 6 from Western European and other states: Australia, Austria, Federal Republic of Germany, Greece, Switzerland, and Turkey. Since the number of candidates for each group corresponds to the number of seats allocated to that group, I declare that those candidates elected vice presidents of the conference. I have also been informed of the candidature of Mr. Adolf Tiborowski, Director General, Research Institute for Environmental Development of Poland, for Rapporteur General of the conference. In the absence of any other candidate, I declare him elected Rapporteur General of the conference, and I invite Mr. Tiborowski to take his seat on the podium. For Chairman of Committee 1, Father George K. Mahoho, Director of the National Environment Secretariat, Office of the President of Kenya. In the absence of any other candidate, I declare him elected Chairman of Committee 1. For the Chairman of Committee 2, His Excellency Mr. H.J. Ansari, Minister of Housing and Urban Development of Iran. In the absence of any other candidate, I declare him elected Chairman of Committee 2. For Chairman of Committee 3, His Excellency Mr. Diego Aria, Governor of the Federal District of Caracas, Venezuela. I declare him elected by your applause. This completes our election of officers. On behalf of the conference, I wish to congratulate those who have just been elected, and I look forward to our close association in the limited time at our disposal. I've just been advised as a new president that I have overlooked item 4, which is the constitution of committees and the allocation of agenda items and organization of work of the conference, which would be a rather serious oversight. The Preparatory Committee has recommended the establishment under Rule 42 of the Rules of Procedure of 3 committees of the whole. I'm sure I covered that. Namely, Committee 1, 2, and Committee 3. That was agreed. Now, the part I did overlook, the conference may now wish to approve the following allocation of items recommended by the Preparatory Committee. For consideration directly in plenary sessions, the organizational items of the agenda, items 1 through 8 and 12. For allocation to Committee 1, agenda items 9 and 11. For allocation to Committee 2, agenda items 10A, B, and F. For allocation to Committee 3, agenda items 10C, D, and E. I take it that the conference approves that allocation of items. It's then so decided. We now turn to the organization of work. I invite the attention of the representatives to the proposed timetable in document A/Conf 70/2, section 3, which takes into account the meeting capacity and the duration of the conference. The Preparatory Committee recommended approval of the timetable with the understanding that the first meeting of the main committees on Monday, May 31st, which will be held consecutively immediately after the second plenary meeting, will be devoted to the election of officers. May I take it that the conference adopts that recommendation and approves the timetable, subject to review as the need arises? Then it is so decided. In order to adhere to the timetable, agreement was reached during the third session of the Preparatory Committee and the pre-conference consultations on a number of points that would expedite the dispatch of our work and thus enable the conference to conclude on time. Those points are: A, that in principal meetings be scheduled from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. That meetings should start punctually and not later than 5 minutes after the scheduled time, and that night meetings would be held if found necessary. B, that to the extent possible, committees should concentrate on the draft proposals submitted to them. C, that the chairman of each committee endeavor at the outset to indicate as precisely as possible the order in which the committee will take up the proposals before it and the schedule for the conclusion of consideration of each proposal. D, that each committee establish a deadline for the submission of draft proposals by delegations. E, that delegations be prepared to take decisions in the committees before the general debate in the plenary is concluded. F, that the work of the committees be completed according to schedule in order that the reports might be reproduced and circulated in all working languages, if possible not later than the day preceding their consideration in plenary. May I take it that the conference approves these measures concerning the organization of our work? It is so decided. The conference may always also wish to approve the recommendation of the Preparatory Committee that in accordance with the practice of previous United Nations conferences, the report of the conference, to be prepared pursuant to Rule 14 of the Rules of Procedure, should consist of Part 1, containing the resolutions and recommendations of the conference; Part 2, containing an account of the General Assembly action leading to the convening of the conference; Part 3, containing a brief summary of the proceedings of the conference, including an account of the work of the main committee. If I hear no objection, it is so decided. Regarding the general debate, the Preparatory Committee agreed, in view of the relatively short time available to it, to recommend that a time limit for the statements in the plenary, including the film excerpts, of 10 to 15 minutes be set for representatives of governments and 8 to 10 minutes for other speakers. That any message transmitted to the conference from heads of state be accommodated within the time limit, and that the list of speakers in the general debate be closed at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, June the 1st, 1976. I take it that it's the wish of the conference to approve those recommendations. It is so decided. I'm sure I can count on the cooperation of all distinguished delegates in this regard. the secretary of the conference would like to make some explanatory intervention.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, concerning now that the conference has approved the closure of the list of speakers, I'll be most grateful that those delegations who have not yet subscribed their name for the general debate kindly register themselves through the list of speakers officer who is sitting on the left on this table. And I should to bring one more additional comment concerning that recommendation of the preparatory committee, sir, namely that those messages which we have referred earlier from the heads of states should be included to their statements. Delegations wishing so may, during the 15 minutes of their intervention, show the capsule excerpt from the film which they have already submitted to the Habitat Secretariat, but we will request them to inform us as early as possible and not later 15 minutes before their intervention. But those delegations who wants to show a film message from the heads of states, which the film have not been submitted to the Habitat Secretariat, should inform the Secretariat at least 24 hours before that this message would be shown during their intervention. I wanted to bring this clarification with your permission, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We now turn to the next order of business for this afternoon, item 7A of our agenda, the appointment of the Credentials Committee. Representatives are aware that Rule 4 of the Rules of Procedure provides that a Credentials Committee shall be appointed with the same membership, as far as possible, as that of the Credentials Committee of the General Assembly of the United Nations at its 30th session. Consultations have taken place with a number of delegations, in particular those countries which were members of that Assembly Committee, in order to reach an agreement on a replacement for China, one of its members, which is not, as of today, indicated that it would participate in the conference. I therefore now propose that the conference appoint a Credentials Committee with the following membership: Belgium, Costa Rica, Libyan Arab Republic, Mali, Mongolia, Pakistan, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and the United States of America, and Venezuela. I take it that the conference approves this proposal. It is so decided. Distinguished delegates, I give the floor to our most distinguished Secretary General of the Conference, Mr. Enrique Peñalosa.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, before beginning and perhaps abusing the trust which has been placed in me for the past 2 years, I would like to make a minor modification in today's program. And Father Mahoho, who has been chairman of the Repertory Committee for the past 2 years, might wish to come up here and stand next to me, next to the microphone.
Durante 2 años
For 2 years now, the Secretariat has enjoyed the cooperation of the Preparatory Committee, made up of 56 states. And there have been many states attending who have been there as observers. The dedication, enthusiasm, and spirit of cooperation of all members have made possible the success of its work. I wish, however, to single out the skill and leadership qualities of Father Mahoho, the chairman, and say that he has been the catalyst of this success. I wish to give to Father Mahoho, on behalf of all members and participants in the Preparatory Committee, the gavel which he used with so much skill over these past 2 years.
Thank you very much. I sometimes felt like using it otherwise than just spamming the thing. Thanks for that.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, although it may seem paradoxical to say so, we are here at the end and the beginning of a long, arduous, and complex task, which the United Nations began immediately upon receiving the mandate of the General Assembly. This has been a process which only in a small way indicates the magnitude of what is expected of us the moment this conference is closed. We are meeting today in a modern site, endowed with all the facilities and equipment that technology and science can offer, in the heart of one of the most beautiful cities in the world. This is a splendid place to hold a conference, which Canada, with its generous hospitality, and above all with its true understanding of the rapidly worsening social and political crisis of our time, has placed at our disposition. But we also are aware that this city, and only a few others like it, are a world apart from that in which more than half the people of our planet struggle for their daily survival. It is a planet which itself each day is more limited and impoverished in its natural resources because of action by those who inhabit it. In this era, we are crystallizing the physical forms which will shelter or imprison future generations. Experience forces us to recognize how much our present life is conditioned by the urban structures, comparatively so small, that we have inherited from previous generations. those which we are building today, with enormous investment of resources and tremendous human effort, particularly in the poor countries, are nonetheless marked by numerous negative characteristics which will shape, whether or not we desire it to be so, the lives of the generations which come after us. The village, the town, city and metropolis, which is to say, human settlements, small and large, constitute the built environment of housing. Or inadequate transport systems, or urban pollution and congestion. It is a crisis of social organization and of civilization itself. But the crisis which now confronts us is not only a question of housing or inadequate transport systems or urban pollution and congestion. In this room are the representatives of many nations in whose care are the great majority of the world's peoples. I regret the absence here today of a few countries which might have had the opportunity to tell of their experiences and their difficulties. Nonetheless, I am sure that these countries will learn what you accomplish and what you propose, and that their representatives will contribute to the understanding of these issues in many future meetings. In 2 short weeks, of course, it is not possible to expect miracles, nor are they expected. The success of the conference will not be measured here in Vancouver, but in the policies, plans, and programs which are adopted in the years to come to better the lot of the masses of the people in each society through the conception and design of better systems of human settlements. This morning I listened with profound interest to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Kurt Waldheim, who, with great eloquence, has placed this conference in its proper historic perspective. As Secretary General of Habitat, it remains for me to touch on some of the more important aspects of the conference, indicating not only needs but concerns which have been elaborated over the past years in direct consultation with governments and with the specialized branches of the United Nations. One of the great accomplishments of recent years has been the awakening of our awareness of ecological problems. When mankind came to consider that the forces under its control and the processes which had begun were so powerful as to threaten the very continuation of life on Earth, an authentic cry of alarm was raised. This alarm was recognized at the Stockholm Conference. It set in motion a debate of vital importance and created forms of action inspired by this new vision of world problems. This conference on human settlements carries forward the global vision of Stockholm, but looks more closely at existing reality in terms of human needs, and thereby faces the imperative requirement not only to respect the earth, but to remake it, to remodel the human environment with new ecological balances, but above all, with new and more just social balances. The answer to this challenge is political. But it is not only governments which will bear the responsibility of facing it, because the solutions will not be found except through collective action. It will be, like all social and political endeavors, a task of governments and people together. It is for this reason that I am pleased by and place the greatest importance in the high political representation as well as the broad composition of your delegations, distinguished delegates. Fundamental changes in the organization and management of human settlements will demand, above all, political commitment and decisions. I am also encouraged by the presence of so many representatives of non-governmental organizations and the world information media, because I believe the decisions that must be taken by governments must be shared and supported by an informed and committed public opinion. These political decisions must also be accompanied by the advice of experts and technicians, who in turn must adapt their experience and knowledge to the new goals and obligations which will result from the examination to which we are pledged. For this reason, I welcome the number and caliber of experts taking part in the conference. Of foremost importance will be the recommendations which will be made here on the need to establish national human settlement policies and on the institutional arrangements through which they can be realized. For it is unlikely that most countries will be able to implement new policies on human settlements without carrying out institutional changes. The very fact of the crisis is obvious proof of the failure of existing structures at all levels of government, within nations and within the international organizations. Distinguished delegates, there are many issues with which human settlement policies may deal, but 3 of them have been raised again and again by your governments, which I would therefore like to mention on this occasion. The spiraling growth of population and the imbalances in development and living conditions between rural and urban areas, with the consequent problem of migration to the cities. The second is the growing disparities in income and opportunity between different social classes, both by region and within individual communities, and the lack of adequate controls over the use of land and over urban sprawl. In the first case, we are faced with the fact that during the last quarter century, nearly 300 million people in the developing world have abandoned their rural birthplaces and joined the migration to urban centers. Governments have tried to stem this human tide, and in most cases, it must be admitted, have failed, because despite the dreadful conditions in urban slums and squatter settlements, the migrant believes that that those conditions are still better than what he has left behind, and that the city is the last hope for a better life for himself or for his children at least. In most cases, moreover, the land is being deserted. Despite the tremendous transfer of people to the cities of the Third World, the rural population in absolute numbers is still rising and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Human settlement policies will have to seek a new balance between city and village, ending rural isolation and dispersion. For if there is no opportunity in the countryside, migration to the cities is a necessity and also a basic human need. Frequently it is argued that the challenges of human settlements in the coming decades could be resolved through control of population growth. Without discounting the high priority among world concerns which must be given to stabilizing the population of the planet, it is also important to keep in mind that the people who will form families and therefore demand housing, services, and jobs over the next 20 years are already born and indeed are among us. Regarding social justice and the sharing of natural resources, most of the developing countries of the world are coming to terms with the hard truth that they cannot achieve a European or North American style of life for the majority of their peoples in the foreseeable future. What has been created in the developing world are bifurcated societies in which a small minority enjoys an imported and exotic level of comfort and consumption, while the masses of the people are deprived of their most basic needs. Nowhere is this duality more apparent and more pronounced than in the great urban centers. The governments of the world have met in recent weeks in Nairobi to consider the injustice in the disparity of wealth among nations. But no less injustice is found in the disparities which exist between social classes in the majority of national societies.
Tema del uso de la tierra es
Finally, the issue of land use is of great concern everywhere, especially as it relates to the responsibilities of government at local, regional, and national levels to recapture and guide the forces of urban expansion. The questions which will be paramount are whether urban growth will continue by a spontaneous and in most cases chaotic process, or will it be planned to meet the future needs of the community, and whether urban land will continue to be treated as a commodity of the marketplace and as an instrument of financial speculation, or whether it will be brought under community control and planning. Distinguished delegates, how these questions will be answered will be among the deciding factors in shaping the human environment, or most nations of the planet, and it will be the most urgent task of this generation and the one to follow. Mr. President, I have not attempted to review all the issues which are for your consideration, but only to synthesize some of the main concerns and questions which have emerged during the preparatory process. In this process, we have benefited greatly from the guidance and assistance of your governments. We have also enjoyed the help, as I have already said, of many branches of the United Nations and of the great number of non-governmental organizations and private citizens who have generously dedicated their time, knowledge, and experience. We are especially grateful for the contributions of the Canadian government, and we wish to praise the work of Mr. James McNeill, the Commissioner General of the Host Secretariat. We wish also to express our gratitude to all those who worked so devotedly through the many sessions of the Preparatory Committee, and especially to its chairman, Father George Mohoho. And it is our duty to note the extraordinary contribution of the United Nations Environment Program and its Executive Director, Mr. Mostafa Tolba, and the great work done by Mr. Maurice Strong, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, and the first Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, whose creative energy has sparked the awareness which the world now gives to the issues under your consideration today. I wish also today to pay a very special tribute of admiration and gratitude to two persons outside the international system who, as a consequence of their personal convictions, have devoted so much effort to awakening the world and its leaders to the threat facing the man-made environment. They are Barbara Ward, the distinguished British economist and writer, and the recently deceased Constantino Doxiades, who, with justice, can be named the father of the new science of human settlements. Distinguished delegates, there are those who believe that the world is tired of crises and that the international organizations are already stretched too thin to take on new responsibilities. But the issues that are before you are of such magnitude that they cannot be relegated to a second priority. They cannot be put aside simply because the world is tired of problems, or because their urgency happens to come later in time than other world concerns. The problems of human settlements can never be totally resolved, neither during this nor during succeeding generations. Work will go on in search of solutions to accommodate changes in population, new technological possibilities, and the evolving demands, needs, and aspirations of society. These challenges must be faced in the coming decades, and we are here to begin to find answers to them. This is the task which has been entrusted to us. It is true that it is a difficult and complex task, as the member states of the United Nations can testify. But it is a task which cannot be avoided if we are to achieve peace. Thank you.
I sincerely want to thank the Secretary General of Habitat, this United Nations Conference on Human Settlement. The analysis of the issues before the conference, which you have presented, Mr. Peñalosa, with such remarkable lucidity, should greatly facilitate our work. Your important statement has indeed set the tone for the general debate, and I'm sure delegations here will take it fully into account. The Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program wishes to make a brief statement. As you know, the Governing Council of UNEP has been fully involved in the preparatory process of the conference under the mandate given by the General Assembly. The audiovisual component of the conference has been largely financed through the generous financial assistance provided by UNEP. It is my pleasure to give the floor to its Executive Director, Dr. Mustafa Tolba.
President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. May I take this opportunity, Mr. President, to offer to you my congratulations on your election to your high office. I'm confident that under your able guidance, this conference will realize its objectives and pave the way to meeting a major aspiration of peoples in every corner of the world. There have been few occasions since the founding of the United Nations when issues of such moment to the future of mankind have been on the international agenda as here, now, in Vancouver. Habitat represents the fulfillment of several years of preparation and investment by the international community. It was a Canadian initiative at the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment which led in due course to our coming together here. We are grateful to our host government and to the city of Vancouver for the determination which they have shown throughout to ensure that every aspect of Habitat should be a success. We are also much indebted to my friend and colleague, the Secretary General of the Conference, Enrique Penaloza, whose dynamic leadership and persuasive efforts succeeded in generating the necessary support of governments during the preparatory phase of this conference. We in UNEP are looking to Habitat to achieve a shift in vision which will bring the urgency of human settlements issues sharply into focus and so promote a coherent strategy and related actions to deal with the problems facing the world's cities, towns, and villages. Experience teaches us not to be starry-eyed about the results of international conferences, but I'm encouraged to believe that this conference will have a most profound impact on thinking and practice in the world over during the next 20 or 25 years. It could and must be the occasion for a fundamental reorientation of our approach to an issue which is central to the future welfare of mankind. Mr. President, UNEP is wholeheartedly committed to the success of this conference. Indeed, as you said, we have supported Habitat since its inception, and we have a deep, close interest in its outcome. Our governing council was the initial forum for discussing the purposes of Habitat, and it has each year since 1973 considered the progress report from the Secretary General of the Conference. Moreover, as you just mentioned, Mr. President, UNEP extended sizable financial support to assist with the audiovisual part of the conference, especially meeting costs incurred by developing countries. Consequently, we are very involved partners with a major stake in the success of the Habitat enterprise. For these reasons, I feel it proper to speak of our hopes and expectations from Habitat. In contribution